So I want to sort of honor the time, and we're thankful for those who are here this morning, and we know that, welcome Tom, that others will join us, and we're thankful for those who are joining us online as well.
You don't mind me sitting here?
Come on up.
So I'm going to get us started with a word of prayer, and then I'll introduce MaryAnn, and then we'll take it from there. Good and gracious God, as we gather on this Lord's Day, we're so thankful for your presence with us now. We're thankful for the hope that you offer each one of us through Jesus Christ. And we're prayerful that you'll prepare our hearts and minds to receive the good word, the teaching that MaryAnn has for us this morning, that we would recognize you in what she has to say and in one another. Send your spirit here this day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Reverend MaryAnn McKibbon Dana is no stranger to this community, as she has taught several classes here, led a women's retreat, and on and off been a teacher for us. She is a writer, pastor, speaker, and a ministry coach. Okay, my screen just died. She's also the author of 3 books: Hope, a User's Manual, which is her most recent book, and which she brought copies of, and we can purchase today at the end of class. Improv and the Art of Living, and
I see it right over there.
Yeah, she taught a couple classes, I think, last year on that book. And Sabbath in the Suburbs, and I think the women's retreat was based around that book. She writes a weekly newsletter for thousands of subscribers called The Blue Room, and I noticed if people want to sign up, there's an opportunity to sign up for that.
I'll pass that around later.
Her writing has also appeared in Time.com, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Religious Dispatches, Journal for Preachers, and the Christian Century and Presbyterians Today. She was featured on PBS's Religion and Ethics News Weekly for her work on Sabbath in the Suburbs, or on just Sabbath in general, and was recognized by the Presbyterian Writers Guild with the 2015-2016 David Steele Distinguished Writer Award. She's currently serving as associate pastor at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Herndon, Virginia. She's a graduate of Rice University in Houston and received her MDiv from Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. She's a mother of 3, an imperfect knitter, and an occasional ultra marathoner. So we welcome you, MaryAnn. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with our online folks. I see people coming in. Susan's connecting to audio, so that's good. I see the little dots dancing on my screen. That's great. It's really, really a gift to be with you all. I do have such special affection for Potomac, having been here several times in different capacities, and you all may not know that I actually officed here for a few weeks this past summer when my son was enrolled in a program in Cabin John, and I live in Reston, and so the idea of crossing that bridge every day, I was like, can I stay here? Do you have a room somewhere, or a little cupboard under the stairs for a little Harry Potter? And yes, graciously provided hospitality. So this is part of my thank you to you all for that. So as Emily mentioned, my latest book, which came out last year, is Hope, a User's Manual. And I won't be talking, sort of teaching out of the book, but giving you some concepts that kind of sit alongside it, and some things that I thought about and worked with as I was thinking about this really basic concept in our Christian faith of hope. And what do we mean by hope? And what does the broader culture mean when we talk about hope? And how do we find hope in what often can seem like hopeless circumstances? That's really where the book grew out of that. And not only kind of looking at the world around me, but also our closer to home, our family was going through a really difficult time with our eldest, with some major kind of mental health issues during high school. I'm happy to report that Caroline is a junior in college at Agnes Scott in Atlanta and is just doing really, really well. And as many of us know who have mental health and mental illness that has touched our lives, we know that that can sometimes rear its ugly head again. And so we take nothing for granted in this life, but are grateful for that's where we are. And that is a real gift. So I wanted to, with the time that we have, give you good morning, a lot of different ways of thinking about hope. We'll talk in a little bit about hope theologically. What do we mean as Christians when we talk about hope? But I want to start with thinking about hope kind of culturally and thinking about our kind of cultural conversation and how we use that word in our broader culture. And so what I want to do is I want to show you a very short video. It's called 40 Inspirational Speeches in 2 Minutes.
Oh.
And it is a supercut from a lot of different movies, which you will see. And I want us just to reflect on this as kind of a cultural document. What does this say? I like to, like when I need a little bit of motivation, when I need to kind of pump myself up, I'll sometimes watch this video, which is kind of silly, but it kind of gets me going. And so I want you to listen for and watch for words or images that kind of are some of the catchphrases or things when you think about building up hope or helping people feel kind of motivation and kind of purpose. How do these images kind of feed into our cultural understanding of what hope is here in the United States? So with that said, just listen and enjoy. It's also just kind of a fun little supercut there, but we will talk about it a little bit afterward.
Will you fight? No! We will run! And we will live!
Shame on you. This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
And I guarantee a week won't go by in your life you won't regret walking out, letting them get the best of you.
Well, I'm not going home.
We've got too far!
And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy.
You're gonna work harder than you ever worked before.
But that's fine, we'll just get tougher with it.
If a person grits his teeth and shows real determination,
failure is not an option.
That's how winning is done.
Believe me when I say
We can break this army here.
And win just one for the Gipper.
But I say to you, what every warrior has known since the beginning of time.
You've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
if you would be free men, then you must
Fight to fulfill that promise. Let us
cut out their living guts 1 inch at a time.
and they will know what we can do!
Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions.
You're like a big bear, man.
This is your time.
Seize the day.
Never surrender. Victory or death.
That's the Chicago way.
Who's with me?
Clap! Clap! Don't let team die! Clap!
All right, let's fly.
And gentlemen in England, now a bed shall know my name is the Lord. When I tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our Independence Day.
Very, very silly, right? What did you notice though? What are some kind of scenes or images or phrases that kind of grabbed you, or what did you notice about the video in general?
Well, this is kind of silly, but most of the images were men.
Yes, I noticed that too. Right. Yeah, there's kind of an image of kind of the great leader that sort of motivates the people, right? And there's definitely lots of that in this video.
Some children.
Yeah, couple of women, but yeah, the sort of the idea of being able to give a good speech. Yeah.
I just love that. If you believe in fairies, clap.
Yes, right,
clap,
right, yes.
clap, and that was right there.
Yes, it's so fun to have like the kind of, I mean, there's a lot of battle imagery in this too, like people trying to rally the troops, but then you have the Muppets kind of, you know, let's do this. There's Jim Belushi in Animal House, you know, or John Belushi. Anyway, what else did you notice?
Too much testosterone.
A lot of testosterone, yeah. And I think that that also kind of speaks to the idea of hope being very kind of, and muscular, not in the sense of like brawny, but sort of strong. Like we're going to have resolve and sort of, you know, we think about our hope that way. Hope in strength rather than hope maybe looks different in other cultures or in other ways that we might think about. Hope is maybe us people coming together. Hope maybe comes in cooperation, right? So there's other ways of thinking about that. Anything else that you noticed? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's not a passive commentary. It's emotional.
Yes.
So it involves emotion
Yes.
and a commitment for sure, but emotion as opposed to being a passive. Yes, this is important that we go do this as opposed to, well, let's go out and do whatever we have to do.
Yes, yeah.
At the end of the battle or at the end of the game, and you're the loser, where's the hope?
Yeah.
It seems to me, in that circumstance, you need a lot more hope than at the beginning of the game or battle.
Yes, right. When I was doing presentations a year ago on this topic, and I saw your hand, I won't, don't let me forget. I showed, when we were kind of talking about cultural ideas about hope, the actor Michael Sheen, who is from Wales. And this was about a year ago when Wales was going to play in the World Cup and a real underdog team. But he was on kind of the British equivalent or the UK equivalent of Sports Center. And they asked him, would you give a kind of motivational speech to the boys from Wales, you know? And so he kind of stands up and he uses all of this imagery of like the red mist going over the hills and, you know, like, because they were going to play, I think, England, one of the first games, and vastly under, I mean, they are the real underdogs in that kind of battle. He says something like, we're not going to be troubled by a neighbor back home when we go to Qatar, you know. I mean, it just was and it has a lot of the same kind of feel to it. But your point is, well, I mean, like they did not advance far in the World Cup, right? So this idea of hope and how does hope dwell even for the people who aren't the victors, right? That's the real question. That's when you need it. I want to make sure
you just used the word that I was thinking of, motivation.
Yes, right.
They were all, the very beginning was all motivational.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the way I think about your, you know, your a question about, or you're thinking about the emotional aspect of this, right? Is part of the reason that I wrote the book is emotionality is part of it, right? Because it's our action, what we're willing to do. I mean, that helps build hope. What we think might happen, but it also is about our emotionality. It's kind of our whole being, right? But where do we find hope even when we don't feel that emotion?
Yeah,
right?
I was just going to comment when Tom had mentioned about, okay, what happens when you lose a battle? Actually, one example in what you showed, or related to what you showed, was in the Braveheart thing.
Yes.
There is a battle that's lost.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, is betrayal involved as well.
Right.
Yet hope never is lost.
Yes, right.
So
right.
to my way of thinking, not only is it emotional, but hope, and this maybe draws on the faith of man. We're probably going to talk about this, but there is a commitment. It's not a flash in the pan.
Yes, right. Yeah,
you have real hope. If it's not that commitment and just, hey, kind of a hope at the time. Oh, okay, I had hope, but you know, now it's gone.
Right.
That's really the test in terms of human longevity, in terms of hope.
Yes.
As a lifestyle.
Right. You know, it kind of takes the long view, right? And also is not and we'll talk about this when we get to kind of the theology of this. It's really that kind of cosmic long view. I mean, for us as Christians, the idea that God is not finished with us yet, and God is up to something here, and even in the immediate, which can seem very hopeless. I mean, it's interesting. This is the first kind of one of these that I've done since October 7th, and what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. And everybody who knows anything feels like it's so intractable. Like, will there ever be peace in that region, right? And yet we have to continue to hope and have a good hope that that is possible. Otherwise, will we simply just give up, right? And say it doesn't matter. Yeah.
However, as General Bill Hartzog of this conversation once said, hope is not a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have the St. Crispin's Day speech and you can have all the hope, but if you don't have what it takes, it's not a strategy.
Yes, that's
so
a great,
it's kind of misleading.
Yeah, that's a great segue to the first kind of piece I want to talk about culturally. Is one of the things that we get tangled up in here in the United States is we are fundamentally, I think, a pretty optimistic culture. And how do we think about optimism and hope as similar and different? And there's a lot of different ways that people have defined this. This is a sign that I actually saw when I was walking through National Airport some time ago. They're one of those kind of public campaigns, you know, that have these different virtues. And this one is for optimism. It will get brighter, right? And we will often hear one another tell each other things like this in difficult times. It's going to be okay, you know, or God has a plan in this, you know, the sort of slogans that we can kind of throw out there that we may legitimately believe and find comfort in. But for those folks who are still in the midst of it, that can feel a little hollow. So how do we think about hope versus optimism? Here's another one from that same campaign. On the 10,000th try, there was light. There's Thomas Edison, right? He kind of just kept going, kept persevering. To your point about not just, I hope I'll be able to figure this out, but putting action behind it, right? And there's something miraculous about the fact that the 10,000th try there was light. I mean, he kept going and he persevered, but there are people who persevere all the time and don't see their aspirations realized. So we can sometimes fall prey to a simplistic view of hope, whether that's optimism, whether that's kind of a cheap version of hope. And that's what I really wanted to push past in the book, and not, you know, hope as the kind of flowery Instagram post, but hope as something that is much more robust, right? That's what I want to try to get us to. This is a quote from Jonathan Sacks, rabbi. I think he serves in the UK now, but he's talking about these terms biblically. He says, optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Here's your point about purposefulness, right? Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. The Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book. It is, however, one of the great literatures of hope. I've shared this quote with a couple of different groups, and it has never occurred to me to ask, but I'd love to ask this group. I think he's right that the Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book, because there's just so many times that the people of Israel hit up against a wall, whether it's, you know, slavery or their own intransigence and prophets needing to kind of call them back. Do you think the New Testament is an optimistic book? I mean, I think we might all agree that it's a hopeful one, right? Because here's where we learn who Jesus Christ is and what he means for us and for the ultimate redemption of creation. But would you consider it an optimistic book? And again, I've never thought to ask this, so I don't have a kind of a good answer at the ready, but I'm curious what you all think. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about hope and optimism, hope needs to have, like, for me, hope is the spring for something solid. So there's something solid that brings out hope in my heart. So God says something and God shows me who he is. So who he is what's behind what he has said.
Yes.
That is the foundation. That's the rock that gives me hope. That's the reason why no matter what's flying all around, no matter the kind of storm, I know that God, who he is,
Yes.
I know that he's real. I know that he's solid. So you see Jesus telling his disciples that you're going to be hated. You're going to be persecuted. They will kill you and they will think they were serving me. And he told them those things. It was not like in the culture about optimism, say, don't worry, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
He says, in me, you will have peace.
Yes.
You will have to know me. I have to be the rock. I have to be I have to be the substance, because that's where your hope comes from. Like the book of John says that Jesus came to bring hope and truth. It says the law came by Moses' law. Hope came through Jesus. Right. So that's he himself, his person is like a solid rock that gives you hope.
The denomination put out a statement, a theological paper many years ago that was called Hope in the Lord Jesus Christ, right? And I love that idea of the foundation and the spring, right? The sort of thing that gets you going. And there's plenty that's not optimistic in that book, right? And the New Testament, I mean, the book of Revelation is written to 7 churches that are experiencing persecution, right? There's not a lot of optimism in that situation, but there's a great deal of hope. Bob, what were you going to say?
Yeah, actually, I kind of think, I would say that the New Testament is both optimism and hope. And the reason I say that is because when we use the word optimism, oftentimes we say, okay, optimism means we think it's going to turn out this way or that way. Whereas hope says, I don't really know how it's going to turn out, but I'm hopeful it will turn out in a way that will be good or whatever. Okay. And I can be optimistic about that hope.
Yes.
So, I mean, I've always kind of felt, and Jonathan Sacks, he wrote The Great Partnership, which is one of the books, and because I recall this quote in that book, and we read that in our religion and science group here at church. And I always felt that if you don't have hope, then you'll never have optimism, and you'll also be just depressed. And in essence, I've used the term in the past, dead to life.
Right.
You are not, I know people who have lost hope, and it's unfortunate because they're not living anymore. Really. I mean, they're alive, but they're not really alive.
Well, and that, we're going to talk about that in a minute, because I think there's also voices that, as I was researching the book, because I was really looking for a kind of hope that isn't specific, if you will, like hope that this will happen. Like I want to be a hopeful person, even not knowing or not being sure what the outcome is going to be. So kind of more of a generic, but a deeper hope rather than hope for this particular possibility, right? And I think that the theological piece, which I think is the next, what happens sometimes is if we just default down to optimism, and this is something I thought about a lot as I was writing the book, is we get this kind of what's called toxic positivity, which doesn't have any room for difficult emotions or an awareness that life is hard when you're in the midst of it. You can still be a person of hope and acknowledge that things are really tough right now, right? But the way that our culture sometimes doesn't have a lot of patience for that, that's what is known as toxic positivity, and the idea of good vibes only, right? You see that on social media where it's like we're not being honest with the complexity and intricacies of our lives, which may have hope, but in the meantime, life is difficult. So that, I think, is optimism without hope run amok, right? Not all positivity is toxic. But there is sometimes a danger of, for sake of our own comfort, we don't allow people. I mean, a third of the Psalms are lament Psalms. And there's a reason that those are in there. And some of them don't end with a little, oh, but I know it's going to be okay. I mean, some of them do, right? But some of them are just lament from the first to the last verse. And I have to think that if that is part of our biblical record and our sacred text, that we can be there too, and not shortcut our way to, oh, I don't know why it needed to ask me that right this very minute, but anyway, so yeah, so let's talk about, because we've already, what on earth is happening? Unmute your speaker.
Are you still on,
Yeah, I don't know what's,
Okay.
I got a pop-up, error message, but anyway, let's talk a little bit about, because we're already thinking theologically, very appropriate for Potomac Pres. This has been a gift that you all have brought every time I've taught. We want to go right to some good theology. When we think about theology and hope, one of the first people we kind of think about in our kind of cultural and kind of theological canon is Jürgen Moltmann, who wrote about the theology of hope. And his idea is that theology is, oops, I need to stay over here because otherwise the camera's not going to follow me. The idea that Christianity is eschatology. Eschatology is about final things. Where is all this headed, right? And that means that we need to be forward-looking, forward-moving, but that forward orientation, that God is with us to the very end and is going to redeem all things, has an impact on how we are right now in the everyday life of the Christian. How do we live now in light of that future? It doesn't mean we just kind of sit around and wait for it. We actively work for it, right? That's part of our mission, our call as Christians. Hope is the lens through which we perceive reality. So even many of us are reading the news and thinking, how on earth can this resolve in a way that is optimal for human flourishing? I mean, insert whatever issue of the day is on your heart and mind. For us as Christians, we are called to hold out, even when we can't see the optimism, even when the facts don't seem on our side, that hope is part of what we do. In these last few weeks, I've been thinking so much about my trip to the Holy Land back in 2019 and the many people that we met, one of whom was a man named Mitri Raheb, who is he's a Palestinian Christian Lutheran pastor, has lived in Bethlehem for many, many decades. I think only the first 5 years of his life were not under occupation, right, in occupied Palestine. And he's done a variety of things. He's pastored churches. He currently is president of a college there. And his kind of mantra, his statement of faith, if you will, is hope is what we do. And I write about him a little bit in the book. But that idea of and I love the double meaning of it. Hope is what we do. Because on the one hand, hope is what we do. Like when I asked Emily, what do you do? I'm a pastor. What do you do? I'm, work for the FDA, whatever. So that's our occupation, but it's also hope is wrapped up in action. I mean, that's, I think, what he means by that. Hope is what we do. I was listening to a podcast on the way over here that's called Hope is a Verb. Mm-hmm. And the idea, and it just profiles people around the world who are doing things to help make the world better. And how do we find hope in those stories? And for Moltmann, it's kind of what you were saying, the idea of hopelessness is hell. That is what hell is. Mm-hmm. That separation from God where we see no hope. And that is Moltmann's perspective. I want to give you an alternate view, because I think that this perspective holds sway in a lot of our kind of cultural and religious spaces. But I want to introduce you or reacquaint you, if you know his work, to a Cuban ethicist named Miguel de la Torre. He's a Christian ethicist who teaches at Iliff Theological School, Divinity School. And he has provided a corrective, or he kind of wants to talk back to Moltmann a little bit based on his own perspective, his own position in his kind of experience among his community. And he wrote a book that's very provocative called Embracing Hopelessness. And I want to encourage you, if you are interested in what I share here and want to hear more from him, there is a really interesting, on YouTube, he did about an hour-long presentation for Next Church, which is a Presbyterian organization. So if you go on YouTube and you search for Miguel de la Torre Next Church, you will get his complete set of remarks, which again, very provocative for a room of mainly kind of white Christians with a few folks of color who he said, I'm really talking to the people of color in the room when he said this, because so often the way we talk about hope ends up domesticating the people on the margins, because what it does is it says, okay, your situation is not good right now, but you just need to have some hope. Everything's going to be okay in the end, right? And what that does is it keeps people pacified because they're worried about losing what little they have in order to go out and try to make their own situation better, okay? And let me just say that he is not, and he doesn't claim to speak for every person of color. He's really talking from the perspective of having been born in Cuba, grew up in Puerto Rican sort of section of New York. He said, I am no smarter than a lot of the people that I went to school with and grew up with, and I somehow ended up a seminary professor, and many of those folks are in jail. And there's a sense of, just like the Thomas Edison, you know, the 10,000th try. There are other people who try 10,000 times and they don't make it, right? So how do we speak into the experience of those people for whom daily living is so beset by challenges that they do not see a way out? Where do they find the kind of motivation to act, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to just talk about this idea of Holy Saturday. For him, what we are called to do, what he feels called to do as a Christian, is to stand in radical solidarity with people who are in the most abject, marginalized kind of places, and bear witness to that kind of, my God, why have you forsaken me? And where, you know, what you were saying, Bob, which I think is so well taken, about hope is what kind of gives us some of the motivation to act. So how do we find motivation to act if we don't feel hope? That's his question, right? If we don't have that feeling, if we don't have that perspective, that long-term view, how can we find what we need, that perseverance, that courage, that strength to take action in our own circumstances? And his you know, kind of counter to Moltmann is that when we are desperate enough, when people are desperate enough, when they have nothing left to lose, that is when they will act. And that there's something, what I find kind of ironic about his work is I find it ironically hopeful that the idea that someone would be so, it's like, I got nothing to lose, I'm going to do what I can, because that's I have the ability at least to do that, right? And this idea of poder, which is a Spanish word that I will not translate because he said that it is an expletive, but the idea is that it's an ethic of, if you know the kind of archetype of the trickster, those kind of beings in literature that kind of mess with the powers that be. They're usually from a more marginalized kind of group, like you think of Coyote or Brer Rabbit, you know, that sort of pull one over on the powers that be. That's what Joder is about. It's kind of like to screw with the powers. And so he lifts up numerous examples in his book of these groups that will kind of sort of play with some of the power structures in an effort to kind of say, we are still here, we are not giving up, right? So I lift this up not because let's all sign on to this, but to say that there are lots of different ways of thinking about hope. And that if we're not careful, hope can become a very bland, superficial kind of concept that we use to paper over all manners of injustice. And so we need to be careful about that. And so what I would say in response to this perspective is that we need to we need to make sure that hope is not that kind of cheerful, superficial kind of concept. Because I think that's really what he's critiquing the most. That's what I would say to him. A couple of additional notes, this is going beyond theology, but going to maybe some more philosophical kind of different ways of thinking about hope. Jane Goodall, world-renowned anthropologist, has been at this work for many decades and has a podcast called, I think it's called Hopecast. And she interviews people and finds a great deal of hope, even in the midst of what is really, really a difficult moment that we're in. And she had an interview, a conversation recently with Ayanna Johnson, who is a climate scientist. And it was really fascinating to hear the two of them talk to one another, because Jane was like, well, of course we need hope. I mean, if we don't have hope, we don't have anything. And I see a lot of reason for hope. And Ayanna Johnson, who you may notice is coming from a different generation, different racial ethnic background, says hope is not a useful category for me. To me, I think about what requires courage and what is our moral imperative. So for her, she's also critiquing that simplistic view of hope that I think Miguel de la Torre is, in saying, this may not work out. This kind of climate crisis that we are experiencing, we may not be able to completely pull ourselves out of it. There may be things that have been put in motion that cannot be stopped. And there's a lot of loops that kind of happen as the planet warms. That happens even more. And she says, but I am driven by asking the question, what is the right thing to do in this situation, even if it doesn't result in what I hope it will? It is still the right thing to do. And that's what gives me the motivation to act, not hoping that it'll all work out, not hoping that this will result in X, Y, and Z, but as a moral person who wants to give to the world, and I think Miguel de la Torre uses this language too, I must respond as if it will work out, even if it may not. Does that make sense? Another way of thinking about that, I mean, again, there's generational perspectives here. And again, I'm painting with broad brushes, and there are lots of different varieties of perspectives. But you think about youthful climate activists, and many of them will say, and Greta Thunberg has said this, I don't want your hope, I want your action, right? Because hope can too often just, oh, this is so awful, it'll surely work out. We need to take action for that to be so. And then the second thing I want to share on this slide, and then we'll stop for some conversation. This is Austin Channing Brown, who writes a lot about racial issues and does a lot of anti-racism work. And after Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, she wrote this. She said, I get asked about hope a lot when talking about race in America. White folks usually mean, are you optimistic? But Black folks connect hope to duty, legacy, the good fight. Kenosha is why the freedom movement cannot survive on optimism. There's too much to mourn. So I have thrown a whole heck of a lot at you. And my goal in doing that is to get you to think critically about this idea of hope and the way that we have often taught it, embodied it, thought about it in our churches and in our families and in our cultural contexts, just to open it up just a little bit. So I'm going to stop there before we get to this section and ask what questions or comments you have. Pushback too. Love to hear it. So.
This is very general, but when I think of hope, I don't think of specificity. But if you broaden hope, what is one's sort of goal, or what are the attributes of hope as it broadens and encompasses? So you went back to optimism, which to me is more attitudinal. Whereas hope is more, it embraces. So I suppose the context in which you use hope is different. from situation to situation.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think, as you said before, hope is something that embraces and is outward bound.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about the last few years and this pandemic that we all experienced, and I remember some of the kind of awarenesses as, you know, I would go to the store and there wouldn't be any toilet paper there, you know, or I would want to order something on Amazon that was trivial a few months before, and it was not going to arrive for weeks and months, right? And those things that we take for granted are things that other people in the world do not have easy access to. And I think one of the things that the pandemic did for many of us that was very destabilizing, but maybe helpful in the long run, is that it's easy to think about hope, that everything's going to be okay, when life usually has worked out okay for you. When you're in a context where that's just an easy way to think about hope, right? I mean, we all have difficult things that happen in our lives. Do not get me wrong on that. But that's a very kind of, to use a word that gets overused, kind of privileged view of hope, that it's just kind of all going to work out all right. And there are many people for whom it does not work out okay. So how do we think about that? That's not connected to a specific outcome, but that is a sensibility. It's a perspective. It's a lens through which we see the world. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I just to build on what you just said. I do think, I don't know if lifestyle is the right term. People take actions on certain things that they're passionate about. And there's no uniform thing to that. Everybody's got their own perspective on a whole variety of things in terms of what's going on in the world, why it's going on that way, issues that they feel are tragic, and I need to take this perspective or that perspective in the actions I take. In all of those cases, hope can still be internally sort of something that is we feel.
Yeah,
it's a condition. I know you mentioned the point about actions, it's a condition. And then going to the point about, I know of some situations, for example, where a loved one has cancer and prolongs for a period of time. And that certainly is a situation where things are not going as you would expect. And you hope for a good outcome. But hope in a good outcome isn't ultimately the right hope, at least in my view. So even when you're in a situation where you're suspecting that the outcome is probably not going to be successful, you can still, you and that loved one can still maintain hope. It's not hope in a specific thing, it's hope that, and it probably falls back on a religious context and belief in God and so on, that even beyond what we know, things will be all right.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in a variety of cases where hope is not lost. And life after these events become very, actually you can't imagine. They're blessings that happen, but they happen because I think hope is a condition that's kind of gotten you through it to an extent. And I hope, I don't know what's going to be the future like for me now because I lost that loved one. But in retrospect, looking back, if you've maintained that hope, things have happened and it's okay.
Yeah. Am I reading that you're a Stephen leader? Yeah, but I'm saying, yeah. Well, and this is exactly the kind of work that you all do in this, right? And I'm thinking about how as pastors, we will, even when we are called to the bedside of someone who is making their transition to the church triumphant, we pray for healing, right? And we don't mean a miraculous cure, although we might as well. I mean, why not? You know, God says we can pray for anything, right? But what we mean is healing is broader. I mean, I kind of think about healing and cure similar to hope and optimism, right? Optimism is kind of, I feel like it's nice to have, but it's in some ways a paler version of hope. And the same with, I mean, we can pray for cure. Obviously, cure is an important thing to pray for, but healing is way more all-encompassing, and it's healing of relationships, healing of your own perspective of trusting that God is with you, even in the midst of that kind of terminal diagnosis or what have you. Yes. Yeah.
A very trivial example of hope and expectation I play the lottery 3 or 4 times a year. More, I don't know. But so I'm in line to buy a ticket, and 2 or 3 people behind me. So I tell the guy, I'd like the winning ticket. So he prints it out. Great, I got the winning ticket. I turn around to the guy behind me. Don't waste your money. I've got the ticket. And he said, what? Well, are you going to have a losing ticket?
Right.
But the psychology, 5 million to 1 chance. But why do you buy it to lose?
Yeah, right. It's a trivial example, but there's a sermon in there somewhere. I really do think that's really lovely.
Right.
Let's go to the next one. Why continue living in a world that is really, really hard a lot of the time? It's because, why do we keep waking up in the morning and trying to make the world better and loving our loved ones as best we can? Because we want to get that winning ticket, so to speak. So, all right. One of my favorite things to think about as I was thinking about different ways of thinking about hope, and the book in a nutshell is kind of thinking about looking at a diamond and sort of different facets of it. So it's not a systematic theology. It's not a step-by-step. It's like different access points for thinking about hope. And the goal was for people who are just needing that infusion of hope. There's a lot of different entry points, and there's like little short kind of reflections. But one of my favorite sections of the book was thinking about hope as living in the stories that we tell. And I want to share with you, this is the work of a science fiction writer named Ted Chiang. And those of you who know the movie Arrival, which was a movie that came out with Amy Adams, in which these aliens visit our planet, and are they here for good or for ill? It's a beautiful, beautiful movie, and is written based on a short story by Ted Chiang. Anyway, he talks about 2 different kinds of stories, and science fiction writers kind of think about these. And I'm going to tell you that the words sound political. They're not political. Don't think about them in a partisan way. But he talks about conservative and progressive stories. Again, not Republican and Democrat, but the way the stories are constructed. And here's how they work. A conservative story, the world starts out as a good place. Evil intervenes. Evil is defeated, and the world goes back to being a good place. You see how that's conservative. We're trying to conserve the goodness of what we have, right? In a progressive story, the world starts out as a familiar place. Something disrupts that familiarity, and the world is never the same. You see, that's a different kind of story, right? It moves us to a different place. Now, I think our biblical story has both elements of that. We start out in a garden, a bunch of stuff happens, and we're ultimately going to be reunited with God. Not in a garden, but in a city, right? So maybe you might argue there's something a little progressive about that, but it also is fundamentally this union we had with God that was broken is going to be repaired at the end of all things, right? That is one of our stories. But I also think that the Christian story is a progressive story because of some of what you were saying about the challenges of being a disciple of Jesus. Means that the idea of familiarity is disrupted. My family is no longer my nuclear family and my extended family. You all are part of my family. The human family is part of my family. That's a different way of looking at the world that Jesus inaugurated. The resurrection of Christ doesn't mean everything's restored to hunky-dory again. What it means is we now have a responsibility to go out into the world and to live as Easter people, right? So you can see how conservative and progressive stories are kind of woven throughout the scriptures and throughout our story. And I think they have hope. There's hope in both kinds of stories. But I love thinking about our lives as stories. And you were talking, I think one of you was talking about looking back in retrospect. I can't remember which of you said that, right? And you can see that God was with you in all of these difficult times. And thinking about the way our lives are lived as stories, I think is a helpful way to think about hope too, because hope can get reduced to a formula, right? We just do this, God helps us out, everything's good, right? but hope is much more complicated than that. And stories are complicated, right? So, so that's just another little piece of, I think, a way to think about hope that can be helpful. Any questions or comments as you listen to those categories?
I have a question. I don't know that I can say anything. I'm here on a big picture, but when you talk about, can you hear me? When
yes,
you
I can.
talk
There was
about
someone else in
hope,
the room that was talking, so go ahead.
yeah, I'm talking. I don't know how to do this, but anyway, when you talk about hope, I think about prayer. And I wonder what's happening with that. I mean, many of us are answered, prayers are answered, and many are not. And sometimes the quantity of hope comes from quantity of prayer. I mean, you get people praying for things that do turn out, and sometimes you don't. Can we change God's mind with prayer?
Right. And there are, I mean, there's another aspect of thinking about hope within our stories, is there are stories in scripture of people changing God's mind. And I think we probably, when I came to teach about God, improv, and the art of living, we probably talked about that, because what do we do with that? And what are we doing when we pray? What was Jesus doing when he prayed, "Thy will be done"? I mean, he prayed, "Remove this cup from me." And that was not to be, but then not what I want, but what you want. So prayer changes us. It allows us maybe to live as people of hope. I mean, I know people who say my prayers were answered, even though I didn't get the literal thing that I prayed for. I think it's a great question. And one of the mysteries of our faith is, what are we doing when we pray? And where does hope kind of fit into that? You had a comment back here. Yes.
Is hope morally neutral, though? You can hope for bad things as well as for good things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't it either a two-edged sword, or isn't it the neutral philosophical point?
Right. Yeah, I was sharing with a group a few weeks ago, a group of pastors, this stuff about Miguel de la Torre. And for him, I mean, he's a Christian ethicist. And so for him, letting go of hope for a certain outcome gives him motivation to act in a way that pursues justice and kind of, I think, outcomes that we would recognize and feel like are worthwhile. But someone who was in that group said, I have talked to warlords in Sudan, and they did not have any hope whatsoever until they picked up a gun. And they're like, this is my hope. I can, now I have some agency to act. And I was like, whew, right? So hopelessness, I mean, it's one thing to say we embrace hopelessness to give us the courage to act even when all hope seems lost. But yeah, it goes both ways, right? That doesn't mean, I mean, without a moral center, that can turn into anarchy and, suicide bombers, right? So, or the kind of terrorism that we saw a few weeks ago. Yeah.
So I'd like to go back earlier. We were talking about, is the Bible about optimism or New Testament optimism or hope? And I actually think it's about hope, but not about optimism. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back to Pastor Chris reading the little children's Bible a couple of weeks ago. And it's not like, oh, it's a sunny day, isn't it great? It is more like, even when Jesus is born, the three kings are coming and they're, like they want to kill, they want to follow Jesus so they can kill him. I mean, it's about hope, it's not about optimism.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to I actually did want to circle back to the politics of it, because just say going to this election, say half the country is Republican, half is Democrat, just roughly speaking right now. And I think because that concept of hope is so fundamental to Christianity, it is what it's all about. And I'm just struck. One of the candidates is saying America's going down the toilet. There's no hope. And I don't. Where does that? How do people reconcile that view with their Christianity of America? Where it's going down the toilet. Everything is terrible. There's no hope for anything. And it seems to me that I don't understand how that goes together with evangelical Christians supporting heavily that message. Where does that go?
Yeah, to me, it calls all of us to make sure we're not settling for a paltry version of hope, which is like continuation of the world as we know it, right? I want to hope for better than what we've had, right? So, I mean, I have some sympathy with folks who are like, man, things are messed up right now. I agree. We probably wouldn't agree on what aspects are messed up. But what keeps me going is a sense that I have a call, and that's what I call hope is my agency to act. In fact, let me give you the last little bit. Actually, I love this quote. The destiny of the world is determined less by the battles that are lost and won than by the stories it loves and believes in. So what kind of story are we going to take with us? But to this point, and this will be my last bit because I know it's at 10:44, so I want to make sure to honor our time. Charles Snyder is a psychologist, and he talked about what is needed for hope are these three things. You need a goal, you need a sense of that you want to go somewhere. And then these two kinds of thinking, pathway and agency thinking. Pathway is, there's a lot of different ways I can get to that goal. Okay, I want to run a marathon. I could hire a coach. I could join a running group. I need to go to the running store and get some new shoes. I need to consult, make sure they're the right ones so I don't get injured. Those are different pathways, right? I can do this kind of training plan, that kind of training plan. And then agency thinking is, I have the ability to do that. So I believe in myself to be able to fulfill these different pathways that are available to me. And you can see why, if you are in a kind of community where you are trying to find where your next meal is coming from, it's hard to have pathway and agency thinking because you're just trying to survive the day. Goals are kind of out of the question because you're, again, just in that survival mode. But I think it's a helpful way of thinking about some of this emotional piece of like, can you see different possibilities for yourself? And that's part of what hope is. And I want to leave you with that kind of a little bit more practical kind of piece. There's a lot more in the book, and I'm not saying that to try to sell more books, but if you're like, all right, I need some practice, like what do you do? How do you build hope? Kind of like exercising muscles. There's some of that in the book and plenty in other places as well. So just a couple of quick things. I do have a little, if you want to sign up to join the newsletter, I write about this stuff every Friday and a lot more. A little bit of inspiration in your inbox each week. Many of you are already subscribed because I make this pitch every time I come. But also there are books in the back, and I do have my credit card reader if you want to do that. And those of you online, it's available on Amazon and all the usual places. But most of all, I just want to say that I'm grateful for a really stimulating conversation. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Emily, for the invitation. And again, thanks for the hospitality over the summer. It was very much appreciated. And God be with you. And God bless. Thank you.